everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Standards Committee on Friday, 11th of October. Can I first take any apologies for absence, please?
I don't have any apologies this morning, Chair.
Thank you. And any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interests, please? None indicated. Thank you. Excuse me. So we have two sets of minutes before us to approve today. The first is the meeting of the Standards Committee on the 24th of July at 2 p.m. Can I take it, please, for accuracy to begin with page 1, page 2? Okay, can I have a show of hands, please, that we formally accept those minutes? Thank you. And therefore, I would like to take the opportunity to welcome our new Community Councillor member, excuse me, Mr. Mark Parkinson. Mark, the minutes refer to that interview session we had, and I think just on behalf of the committee, can I just say how impressed we were with your interview, with your experience, and I'm sure that you will be a very strong addition to the committee. So welcome to your first meeting, and well done. I'm delighted that the council supported our recommendation to appoint you. And the second minutes to be approved today are later that day, still 24th of July at 2:45. Again, for accuracy, please, page 1, page 2, page 3. And again, no issues on accuracy. So again, can we have a show of hands, please, to formally accept those minutes? Thank you. Just one matter arising out of that. You know that, or I think you'll know that on a week last Thursday, I presented on your behalf our annual report for the year 23-24 to Council. That was well received, and it was nice that both the leader and the leader of the opposition paid tribute to the Standards Committee for our work and the way in which we do our work. So grateful as ever to all my my colleagues around the table, and especially to the Democratic Services team for their support in the smooth running of the committee and the way that the annual report was produced and received. Okay, so agenda item 4 is the review of Standards Committee hearings procedure. I did actually say to Council a week last Thursday that we always take the opportunity, whenever we have a hearing, we take the opportunity to review our procedure, to take any learning from experience. We want the procedure to be robust, and I think we want it to be consistent as well. It doesn't matter who's in the chair. So if I'm in the chair, so be it. After my days, if the vice chair, we want the procedure to stand on its own 2 feet and to work for not just the committee, but for the participants as well. And I also took the opportunity to remind Council that we do review any feedback from the adjudication panel for Wales. If following a hearing, if there is an appeal, successful or otherwise, we do reflect on such hearing. So the purpose of the agenda item today is to do exactly that. Not specifically, and I don't think whilst the previous hearing was held in public, I don't specifically want to refer to that one per se in terms of items that were discussed, but this is our opportunity to review the procedure itself. Now, members will have had an opportunity to read in advance a tracked change version of our procedure with a couple of suggestions, excuse me, and there may be others that we want to, well, first of all, we'll discuss those, and there may be other suggestions that members want to make today. I am conscious, and I do want to build on the experience of members around the table. A number of you I know sit on other forms of hearings, other forms of tribunal, both judicial and semi-judicial. So I would welcome and invite you, please, as members, to bring any experience that you've got from those roles into the Standards Committee, so we can reflect on how we can make sure our procedure works effectively for everybody. So I think probably the most effective way that I can do this to begin with is I'm going to go through and just review the suggested I'll call them tracked changes, and then there may be others that we want to discuss separately. So I think in the tracked change version that we've got in front of us, I think the first significant change is at section 3.5. And it is proposed that we add a couple of paragraphs under 3.5, 3.6. The first being the councillor will be informed that any witness statements, including the witness statement of the councillor and documents relied on at the committee, should be provided by a specified time and date, and that any witness statements relied on must contain the following statement of truth. I believe that the facts stated in this witness statement are true. My own reflection on that just over the last couple of days, I think I would like to suggest that we are perhaps a bit more specific. I know it talks in terms of the timescales. I know it talks about specified time and dates. I am keen, it's when we have a hearing, it's important that the participants feel that they had a fair hearing, but it's also important that members have time to read what can sometimes be a significant bundle of documents. So my proposal would be that we just tighten up the reference to the specified time and date by saying, for example, that I'll call it the bundle, so I mean any documents, any witness statements, for example, have to be with members 7 working days before the day of the hearing. And to be clear, what I mean by that is if the hearing was to be held on a Friday, then the Thursday is 1 day before. So I know sometimes we get into debate about what we mean by clear working days. Who do you want to come in?
If you use the term clear working days, that's defined in legislation. It's a lot easier for everyone.
Perfect, thank you. Excuse me. So I'm suggesting that the bundle is with members 7 clear working days before the date of the hearing. And then I suppose that we need to have, in fairness, a clear definition of when the bundle has to be with democratic services, because you can't turn it round in 20 seconds here, and I respect that. So my proposal to be discussed and debated is that that's a further 7 clear working days in advance. So that gives you time to not just to distribute it, but if there are any queries, anything that you feel is missing, it gives you an opportunity to talk to the relevant parties. Excuse me. So I'm going to pause there, not just for the sake of my voice, but also to allow members to come in. Mike.
Yes. I don't know about 7 days before the 7 days. It may even take a little bit longer. I think you should discuss that with Democratic Services, but because in other committees I've been, sometimes the appellant is late. So I don't know whether you want to discuss that with Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I'll just come in on that quickly. I welcome what you're saying there, Councillor, and I welcome what you're trying to do as well, Chair. The reality is, and I'll use the last case that we heard, Adrian Jenner and I worked closely with the appellant, and we gave a deadline, but we'd already built in a factor where we were able to extend that deadline because we thought, let's try and be helpful, because if they fail, so we'd already built in our own little behind the scene deadline, really. So that flexibility would be useful. I think if you let me consider that, and I will put in a reasonable time into that.
I've left it that way so as to allow us to give the councillor a time by which they must get the papers to us, a margin for some slippage on that, then some time for hearing his crew to get the papers to you. So that is why I've not specified a particular date in this, because it'll all vary, because there are a lot of variables.
So on that, the logic would be leave the administration, carry on as is, but I take the point, the standards committee needs 7 clear working days, which I think is the reasonable side for you to get your sides done.
And that's why I set it out as it is. We'll give them a date, building in time for you to sort out papers, so you have them in good time for the meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's a useful exchange. I think it makes sense. So we will find a form of wording that reflects that. to give you the flexibility here. But I say 7 clear working days, please, with the committee, so that we give it the attention and due diligence that it requires. No further hands. Okay, so moving on to 3.6. The councillor will be informed that the committee will not hear oral evidence from a witness whose statement has not been provided, or consider any documents not provided in accordance with 3.5 above, except with the agreement of the committee. So it gives us the flexibility that if we decide in the interests of justice that we would consider something late, it gives us that flexibility. But ordinarily, if it's not in the bundle, we wouldn't consider it. Any objections, any observations? Okay, if not, then I'm going to move on. Thank you. Excuse me. I think the next couple are just some changes to the grammar. So I don't think there's anything significant in 4.1 or 3.6. Okay, and the last tracked change, I think, is 13.1. It's proposed that we change that to say, where practical, the committee will announce its decision on the day and provide a short written decision on the day. Occasionally, the committee will require additional time to consider its decision. A full written decision with reasons supporting the decision will be issued within 10 working days of the end of the committee reaching its decision, and it will be notified to the PSOW, the Ombudsman for Wales, the councillor and the person who made the original allegation, if known. Again, I just reflected on that over the last couple of days. I'm trying to picture a situation where it's a Friday, we don't finish deliberating and announcing our decision until 10 to 5. Is it really practical for anybody then to be expected within Democratic Services or the legal team to send out a short written decision that day? So my proposal would be that we amend that paragraph, but that we actually say that the short written decision will be sent within 2 working days. But where practical, we will announce. So that the other change around where practical, we will announce our decision on the day. We leave that in as an amendment, but the bit about the short written decision, I don't want us to set ourselves up to fail, and I certainly don't want to set up the teams around us to fail. So my proposal is that we change that to provide a short written decision within 2 working days. Again, any observations or clarity, please?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, when I read 13.1, I thought where practical actually related to announcement of the decision on the day, but also the short written decision. So I was always of the opinion that you'd already got that flexibility, because if you can do it on the day, then you will, where practical. If it's not practical because it's 10 to 5 and the resources are not there, then you could actually defer that. That's the way I'm interpreting that at the moment. So it would be nice to have that clarity.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I think you're right. I think we could read that both ways, that when practical could relate to both those things, both the announcing of the decision and the short written decision. Again, I don't think I'm getting any pushback on the principle. We'll find a form of wordings which just gives us that. But let's make it practical. Yeah. Okay. So I had a couple of other observations and potential changes. I'm so sorry, Mike.
Just one thing on that. It is very ambiguous, that statement there. As you say, Mark read it a different way to what I read it, and you assumed it was going to be taken. I still think we should go with what you said earlier about the 2 days. Personally, that's my own view, but just to tighten everything up and make sure that there's no anomalies and no people coming back to us because of what we've written in our statement. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike. And for clarity, what I'm going to suggest at the end of this session is we take a formal vote on what we've talked about, but that we re-agenda it for next time. So when I say an appropriate form of words, the committee will see that form of words at the next meeting, and we will then formally approve that revised wording, if that makes sense. So I want to get a level of consensus on what are we trying to achieve, but I do take both of your points that we will come back next meeting with, and this is what we suggest in terms of that formal wording. Does that now work for us? Thank you, Mike. Okay, I had a couple of other observations, suggestions. So I just wonder whether specifically when we are writing to the parties in advance, so for example, under 3.4b, it currently says committee will write to the council setting out further steps. This will include, and then down to B, clarification as to whether the councillor will be represented and if so by whom. I would like to suggest that we put in a sub paragraph there and that we ask all the parties, not just the councillor, but all the parties, whether there would be any adjustments required at the hearing. I think it's sensible that if there are any adjustments, that Democratic Services have the opportunity to not hear about those on the day of the hearing, but actually know in advance so that we can put those practical arrangements in place. I'll just pause there for a second. Any observations or clarification on that proposal? Okay, so I'm so sorry. Sorry, Michaela, I missed your hand. I do apologise.
That's all right. Yeah, that's. I thought that was a good point as well. I was wondering on that point though about the scope of representation. So whether it was clear to the councillor, first of all, that a statement saying that they could be represented and what the form of that representation could be.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look to my left and ask Adrian what guidance is currently given when we write out. How clear are we as to whether they're allowed to be represented? As Michaela said, the form of that representation. What do we currently say? Because I think we're asking the question, but are we clear on what they're allowed to do?
Okay, can I just check what I said in the last letter? If you can give me a few moments and I'll check and confirm.
Yeah.
Well, whilst you waited there, just one observation across the whole policy. It would help for absolute clarity that every reference to working day becomes clear working day. That really will help us because there is no dispute then what we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. I think that makes sense, Hugh. Thank you, Janet.
Yes, thank you. Picking up on Michaela's point about not just the representation, but adjustments. I think people need to have an understanding then, some kind of written something to say adjustments would include and whatever they may be. So it isn't just about representation, but what other adjustments might be needed.
Yeah, thanks, John. I suppose it's a fine line, though, isn't it? In the sense of if we do a list and we miss something off, then they say, "Oh, I can't have that."
In line with legislation, then I would say.
Okay, thank you. And whilst I'm so sorry, Mark.
Yeah, and I think what might be interesting in there as well in the views if we have the capacity as well. So if someone's actually, will be represented, and if so, by whom, and in what capacity? Are they legal capacity? Are they a witness? It's just giving us that clarity on why they're there. So when they're called, we've got it in his mindset why they've been brought forward.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm just reflecting on Janet's point about adjustments. We could say, are there adjustments around protected characteristics under the Equality Act, for example? And there is now, of course, we try to come up with 6 examples that don't fit into that very neat. Okay, I suppose what's the spirit of what we're trying to achieve? The spirit of what we're trying to achieve is that we want to make this a process that works for everybody. It's never going to be a comfortable process. If you're a councillor and you're in front of the Standards Committee, it's not going to be a comfortable process, but we do want to make it as clear and as effective as we can, and to the extent that we can, as comfortable as we can, So I just want the spirit of what I'm trying to achieve, I think, is if somebody needs an adjustment, whatever that might be, well, you know, it could be a BSL interpreter, it could be a not first language English, whatever it is. I just want them to have advance notice that if they make that request, then Democratic Services will do their best to fulfill it. That's the spirit of what I'm trying to do. How we come up with the words, again, I'll leave to brighter minds than mine around the table. But it's just giving notice that we want them to. We're inviting them to make us aware of any adjustments they require. Excuse me. And then the separate point around representation, which Michaela has made. Just while we're on adjustments, so I've talked there in terms of when we give notice about the hearing, and I think I would also want to put a specific onus on the chair of the hearing to ask again before the hearing commences to check whether any adjustments are required. Not sure where that would fit in. Probably procedure of the hearing, isn't it? So under section 9, probably to make a new 9.2, where requested the hearing will be conducted in Welsh. I suggest that we put in a new 9.2 there, that the chair will ask at the outset of the hearing whether any adjustments are required. So if anything's been missed, that's the opportunity that we pick it up. You ready to come back in?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Adrian's ready to answer your question, Michaela, I think.
Hello, yeah, sorry, the letter sent to the last council the committee met with just asked for clarification as to whether they'll be represented and if so, by whom. Nothing more than that.
Okay. Yeah. So isn't it just a bit clearer, first of all, that people understand whether or not they're permitted to be represented, and then you would define that by saying, you know, by legal representation, or sometimes people are accompanied but not represented, aren't they? And you need to make clear that anyone accompanying is not a witness or hasn't got anything to do with the hearing. That's what you normally see in procedural rules, that sort of thing, just for clarity, really, so people understand.
That's really helpful, Michaela. I think it builds on Mark's point as well in terms of in what capacity are they here. So thank you. We won't try to come up with that form of words today, but the point is well received that we need to be clearer on are they allowed to be represented, by whom, and in what capacity. So we will find a form of words for that. That's really helpful to you both. Thank you. From you both. Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing, we're putting sort of time elements into it. Are we going to need the same time element if they're requesting adjustments or representation, that they need to do that within a certain time period as well?
It's a good point. To my mind, I see that happening the 2 weeks or whatever we've just given flexibility to Hugh, because most things can be arranged within that sort of time period. If it was something that I can't even picture at the moment, then I guess we might have to postpone a hearing, which we.
But is that rather an assumption rather than clarifying that that's when it needs to be made? So if there are requests for adjustments or representation, that they're made at that time?
Okay, so if we build on what we said earlier in terms of the timescales for the bundle, that any request for adjustments have to be made within that by that same deadline. I think that's the spirit of what you're saying. Thank you, Janet. That's really helpful. And the last one that I had is under the current 9.2, witnesses will not be allowed to sit in the public gallery. And I just wondered why we've got that in there. I know it's historic, it's not a track change. I think, fortunately, I've never been there. I think in a criminal case, witnesses aren't allowed, but in other jurisdictions, you would be. So in a civil case, you'd be allowed to sit at the back and hear the evidence. In an employment tribunal, you'd be able to, for example, and other.
No, in the committees that I sit on, the witnesses are not allowed to be in the room at that time.
What type of hearing, Janet, just to help the committee?
That's with Social Care Wales and looking at fitness to practice committees.
Okay, I wonder whether members have a view. It's so, I say, in criminal cases not allowed, civil cases are allowed, not in fitness to practice, but in employment tribunals they were. My view is that's an unnecessary restriction, but I'm interested in members' views. In this context, I'm interested in members' views as to, is there a reason why we wouldn't want witnesses to sit at the back of the hearing whilst it's proceeding before they give evidence. Any thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. I think from a council perspective, in the disciplinaries, from a staffing perspective, I've been involved in, the ruling tends to be that witnesses are actually don't come into the meeting and witness the disciplinary hearing. They're kept in a separate room and they're brought in as and when the time's appropriate. And the rationale is that you want them to come in and to almost operate as honestly and openly as possible and not be influenced for what was said previously. And I think that's why, to some extent, we keep them separate.
Yes, Hugh, thank you, Mark.
I must admit, it's an interesting one. I can see the difficulties on all sides, but the point I need to throw into for you all to consider, the majority of these hearings are in the public domain. They are streamed live. So even if I put that person in a separate room, they can watch it online. They can get messages. This isn't the same type of thing. So my sort of view would be, if the hearing is in the public domain, I would let the witness to be in the room. If the hearing isn't in the public domain, then I would take the counter view, because we can't control what they're going to see otherwise.
Yeah.
Really good observation, Hugh. Thank you. I was wondering when you'd noticed that. Thank you.
Oh,
yeah. No, thank you. It's an absolutely valid point. They could be out there streaming, couldn't they? Adrian, I was going to ask you, but that seems a really clear position from Hugh. Any other observations?
Can I? Yeah, I've got my hand up. You obviously can't see it.
I can't, Michaela. Do apologise. Go for it. Go on.
Okay. I was just going to say my experience is similar to what Janet's saying about regulatory panel that I sit on is exactly the same. And this sort of thing, when it goes to the adjudication panel for Wales, is considered to be akin, isn't it, to a regulatory process. And regulatory hearings are also open to the public as well. So I don't know really. It's a bit tricky, but I would sort of agree with Janet, I think, on the regulatory point, and this is akin to regulatory.
And yes, it is to that extent. But what about Hugh's point that if it's a public hearing and it's being live streamed, is that the difference? That in some of the other
regulatories are public; they are public hearings.
Yeah, but we have a practical difficulty, then, Michaela, don't we? If it's being live streamed, then we could say they're not allowed in the room, and we keep them, out of the process, as Mark suggested. But they could be sat outside on their phones. So I want to make this practical. I don't want a rule that says they can't hear, but actually there's nothing we can do to stop them. So I quite liked Hugh's distinction between, if it's a public hearing being live streams, they may as well be in the room, and I'm paraphrasing for effect. But if it's a private hearing which has not been live streamed, then we would keep them sterile and keep them outside. How would that sit with you?
Well, no, I take that point, actually, what Hugh's saying. Like, practically, that completely makes sense. I'm just saying, regulatory hearings are public hearings, and some of them are live streamed. So the same thing, it's the same thing. I suppose you're trusting the witness, really, aren't you, to to not watch it? But that's not very good. That's not very practical. But no, I completely take Hugh's point.
Okay, so my proposal, unless I get any further comments, is that we will go with Hugh's helpful observation, which is, if it's a public hearing being live streamed, that we remove that reference, or we amend that reference to witnesses not being allowed in. But if it's a private hearing not being live streamed, then we wouldn't expect witnesses in the room until they are called to give evidence. You're looking pensive, Mark.
Yeah, Chair. I'm just working this through because I can see it from an information perspective and not wanting to affect people's statements by listening to what other people are saying. But I'm just almost thinking it from a, if you've got a witness sat there, are they able to intimidate? Doubtful. Are they able to influence in some way? I'm just trying to think why you would do it in other formal settings where you have hearings, and yet we seem to be going against it. So I'm trying to understand what others have been saying, why that logic prevails there and it doesn't prevail with us. Because if it's not about influencing the information that's given by witnesses, then what's that additionality which I'm not aware of?
Okay, I'm going to bring in Adrian. I think you've got a...
I, of course, understand everything you say and the distinction between the different kinds of hearings you may have had experience of. My background is mainly in civil stuff where in the county court, a witness can sit in and listen and watch what's going on. If, of course, during their listening, they've tried to change their evidence to tailor what other witnesses have been said and it's different to their witness statement, it all becomes quite clear quite quickly and they lose any credibility for having done so. To my mind, 9.2 is fine and I don't think it needs tinkering with. That's not my decision, of course, but there's logic to both. But of course, going back to what I say, if someone in civil cases is changing their evidence as a result, then they look foolish.
And I think thank you, Adrian. I think picking up on your point, Mark, about if a witness was being intimidated, well, bluntly, that's for the chair to pick up or for the members to pick up and say, that isn't happening in this room. Okay, so could come either side of the fence. I do quite like, personally, I like Hugh's definition of if it's public, they're allowed in. If it's not public, they're not, and live streamed, etc. So that is my recommendation. Do you want to come in, Mike?
Just a point of clarity, really. Are all our meetings live streams, or are some of the meetings or some meetings in camera?
I think I know the answer here, but do you want to come in?
Of course. Right, with regard to Standards Committee and the Standards Committee hearings, you've got to. The Ombudsman suggests that where possible, we have all meetings open. That's what they prefer. With our last case, we indicated that we wanted it to be open, and we give the appellant an opportunity to say otherwise. They don't get the actual decision, but we do ask them for an opinion. As it happens, the appellant agreed that it should be open, but it would be very difficult for us not to deal with it in an open session, and we'd have to come up with good reasons for it not to be an open session. So, in the main, these things will always be in the open session. But just to give one example as well, recently, a case was held. It didn't come to the Standards Committee. The Ombudsman deemed it of such merit that it went direct to the Adjudication Panel for Wales, and the Adjudication Panel for Wales heard that in closed session. And even though I was fully aware of the complaint, I wasn't allowed to listen in on it either. So, it wasn't just close to the public, it was close to everybody. So it is interesting. They can close where they need to close, but there was no way to know what was said in that meeting at that time. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. I think it does, and 7.1 gives us the ability, doesn't it? The committee will consider whether the case should be considered in public or private in accordance with the statutory rules and legal advice. So we have the option, but I'm with Hugh. I think that we'd have to have a really good reason for doing that, and that might happen one day. Okay, so those were the only observations and suggestions that I had, but grateful to colleagues around the table for feeding in the last couple of days. Are there any other suggestions? Anything else that members would want us to consider? Janet?
Yes, it was 10.2, the final sentence. The committee will, as far as possible, try to avoid formality in its procedures or proceedings. It is a formal proceeding, and I think it's sort of trying to say that we should be relaxed in the way that we do it, and our stance in that. But that doesn't work for me.
I think that, excuse me, that's a fair observation. Again, balance, isn't it, from us all, and Chair in particular, as to make it professional. But I do take your point. It is a formal setting. So, yep, that's fine. I accept that. So my proposal would be that we take out that last sentence in 10.2, which currently reads, "The committee will, as far as possible, try to avoid formality in its proceedings." I think that's a helpful suggestion, Jan. Thank you. Michaela, this time I did see your hand.
Oh, you could see me. Good. Oh yeah, I got a couple of things really that I just wanted to say or raise. I noticed it says his stroke her a lot throughout the document, and whether what you should it should be changed to their, which is more generally used now for inclusivity.
Yeah, good observation. Thank you.
Then, oh, I'll just run through these, then you can, what was the other thing? Oh, there's no reference to the burden and standard of proof at all in there. Should that be considered? Should we put that in? So just so it's clear to the councillor who the burden is on and what the standard is. And if we do put that in at stage 2, should that order be reversed so that the authority goes first and then the councillor second? And what was the other thing I looked at? At paragraph 14, should we set out the time limit for the appeals, or should the document, this at para 14, should it be a link just for ease, really? Because if a person's trying to look that up, they're probably thinking, how am I going to find that? But if it's put in as a link instead, then that would just be much more practical for them, I think. I think that's it. That's my only observations.
Really helpful, Michaela, thank you. So I'm going to try and take those in the order that you raised them. So the burden of proof, I'm going to look to my left, excuse me, as to how we could incorporate that. It seems a fair observation. Adrian, how can we make that clearer, please?
Yeah, I think it does make sense to include that. And yeah, I think I can revise the wording so that it does say that you'll be deciding facts which you have to decide upon on the burden of proof in a civil case, more likely than not. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
And then leading on to, does that mean the order needs to be revised? In civil cases, the person bringing the claim goes first. In criminal cases, the prosecution go first. It's up to you if you want to switch it so that the ombudsman makes their submissions first. How that ties in with the person accepting or not accepting facts. But I think on balance, it does make sense, I think, for the prosecution effectively to go first.
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. Let's, if you don't mind, I'm going to take that away. I think the principle of what you've said is right. As I did say earlier, that we're going to bring back a completely revised, picking up all the suggestions that have been made today. So I think between now and then, let's see how we can build that in a way that flows and makes sense. But I absolutely I do accept the observation you're making. So burden of proof, yes. Does that then affect the order? I think in principle the answer is yes, but we'll just try and make sure that we reflect that properly. The last one, in terms of the deadline for appeals, I guess that's written down somewhere. Sorry, that is set by somebody else, is it, rather than ourselves?
The decision letter last sent gave details of who the appeal should be made to, how they do it, and that they've got to do it within 21 days of the standard committee's determination.
Thanks, Adrian. So again, perhaps we'll just clarify in our procedure then that is what the letter needs to say. I know it already says it, but it's a good point. The procedure doesn't actually give that clarity at the moment. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Michaela. That's really, really helpful. Any others? Okay, thank you. I think that's been a really helpful exercise. I always say that my ambition is that we don't have many hearings, that means that everybody's behaving, but it's also important when we have a hearing that the procedure stands on its own 2 feet. So I know that the wording that we're going to take away and we will bring back to a subsequent meeting, but just for formality, Can I ask, please, for a show of hands on the principles that we've agreed today? And the principle is that we've asked, I think it's between yourself, Hugh and Adrian, that we try to incorporate those, and we will bring that back to a subsequent meeting to get the actual wording agreed. Okay, so a show of hands, please, on the principles that we've agreed today. Thank you. That's been really helpful. Thank you, and thank you to members for your contributions. Okay, last agenda item 5 is work plan. Hugh, do you want to lead on this, and I'll throw a few suggestions in as well?
Of course. Timely, really, with the community councillor Mark Parkinson joining the committee. We've done a lot of work over the past number of years looking at the principal council. We invite the leaders of the council, leader of the political groups of the council in, and we interview them on standards and things. But it leads me to think, what support are we offering to the community town council sector? I'm not proposing for a moment that we go and visit them and do all those sort of things. I'm thinking we bring in a few chairs, interview them to try and ascertain what their understanding of the Standards Committee is, what their understanding of their duties under the Code of Conduct is, and ensuring that adequate training is given to them. And perhaps something for you to consider is asking each community town council to ask that they mandate that all of their councillors attend training in the Code of Conduct. Obviously, at the moment, to be a councillor, you must sign up to the Code of Conduct, but there is no duty for you to be trained in the Code of Conduct. So I think that engagement of the Code of Conduct with the community town council sector, I think, would be a useful one. So that's the first point I'd raise.
Thank you, Hugh. I think that's an excellent suggestion. As I say, we've already got it in place with group leaders for the main council, but not for the community councils. That's an excellent suggestion. Any observations or comments on that suggestion, please? Thank you, Mark.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I have to agree entirely. I think sometimes some of the community councils are actually left on the side slightly, and I think actually to being able to strengthen the Code of Conduct and to mandate the training would be particularly useful for some members. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Hugh.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else? Margaret, thank you. Can't hear you, Margaret. Sorry, maybe on mute.
I thought I'd unmuted. It hadn't reacted. Sorry. I was thinking back to a case we had a number of years ago, and I think it reflected the fact that a lot of the complaints that come under Code of Conduct for, I suppose it's town and community councils, sometimes relate to financial issues. I don't know if some of you on the committee will remember the case perhaps that I'm alluding to. And at the time, I know it was suggested that there should be some sort of training so that they would be clear in terms of the financial regulations and the requirements. Is that training currently being given, and should that also be mandated alongside the Code of Conduct? I'm not sure at the moment exactly what is the main transgression that occurs within these councils, but I think, I think the Code of Conduct is excellent to have that training, but I don't know whether we ought to look as well at what are the most frequent transgressions then, should we say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to bring Hugh in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. Yeah, fully remember the case to which you refer. We did do a piece of work back at the time where we advised all community town councils to encourage their councillors to receive training in financial matters. It's a difficult one for the Standards Committee because you only have responsibility on Code of Conduct matters. Obviously, this is a financial element. I don't see any problem with you sort of reminding them that finance is a useful training place to look at. But I think events have been overtaken slightly with the Local Government and Elections Act 2021, whereby each community town council now must have a training plan in place, setting out the training requirement for each council. Now, I'd be quite disappointed if community town councils hadn't factored finance in, certainly for members of their finance committee, if they have one. And I'd expect a higher threshold in place for the chair of that finance committee. So it's something that perhaps we could tease out if we do these engagement sessions with the community town council sector.
Thanks, Hugh. And I think that's an excellent way of summarising it. So I think that's, just where my head was going is if we build the engagement sessions, it's a question we could ask, and we and encourage them to make sure that it is included. Okay. Any other observations or comments, please, Janet?
Just really a reflection that each of the councils that we've seen, the leaders of the councils, have really said how much they benefited from the engagement with this committee. So I should imagine that the community councils will say exactly the same thing. They will like to be involved and engaged. So I think it's a really good step.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, and the proof is in the eating, isn't it? So it's how we do that, I think, as much as what we do. It's the how we do that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you. The other observation. Sorry, Hugh. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to the work plan? Sorry.
Just sticking on the engagement one very quickly as well. When I said initially I'd be looking to invite chairs of community councils, perhaps there's also a session for clerks of community councils, because if we can work with the clerks, they in turn can work. They're the ones who have the in with the councillors. So perhaps there's 2 sessions running here to be helpful. I'm wearing my clerk's hat there as well, so something to consider. And one other item potentially, it slipped from one. Give me a second, it'll come back now.
All right. So
That's the age.
So whilst you're thinking about that, so two observations from me. One is Margaret, doesn't time fly? But on the 31st of March 2025, you will have served 2 terms, totaling 10 years. So there will be an opportunity for the council, for the committee, to thank you formally between now and then, obviously. But just to put it on our list of to-dos, Hugh, please. Obviously, we will have to probably at the end of the year or early part of next year think about a recruitment process, please. The other thing that I'm keen to do, you're right, Janet. The leaders of the groups, at least they say it. They say that they welcome engagement with the Standards Committee. I will want specifically, before we meet with them again next year, just to look at our list of questions to make sure that those are up to date, and whether I just want members' input as to whether there's any better way. The principle of what we do is great, and it's worked for the last couple of years, but I just want to reflect on the questions, and is there a better way? Are there any areas that we are interested in as a committee that we're not currently asking about? So continue with the engagement, but it's just how we do that. Hugh, did you remember your final point? Okay, no problem. Then we will bring that to the next meeting, Hugh. Okay, any other suggestions or observations for the work plan? I am always very conscious that the work plan in a sense looks thin, but there's another part of me says, well, I quite like it that way, because that means we're not having loads of hearings and loads of issues. Hugh, did you want to come back in? You're looking pensive.
I remember, I'm sorry. I was thinking, we're looking at principal councillors, we're looking at community town councils. Perhaps it's an opportune moment to invite the Ombudsman to have a talk to us. It's just an interesting point, what they've learned, what we can learn, where we can improve, best practice. It's an easy one to do, but it also keeps us on their song sheet too. An easy one to deliver, really.
Yeah, well, we can absolutely, with members' agreement, I think we can absolutely issue that invitation. The Ombudsman, I know, is a very busy person, but I think that's an excellent suggestion, Hugh. Even if it's not in the next couple of days, a couple of weeks, then hopefully we'll be able to factor that in. So that's excellent. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other, sorry, Janice.
Yes, I know that some months ago you were attending other meetings on behalf of this committee, and you were going to come back and report. Is that something that could be standard, a quarterly review or something like that should be in the work plan?
Thank you. Yeah, do you want to come in, Hugh?
Yeah. Interesting point this is, and I remember the discussions we had. I've come off a meeting on Tuesday about this very topic, and the feedback was very much that shouldn't be shared. The chairs committee is to discuss some very difficult things, and when things are ready to go forward, they will come forward as best practice, and they really don't want the chairs to be feeding back to the wider to the committees at this stage. They will wait for formal things to be drafted and for that to come out. They don't want the committees to be compromised and to become politicised, and that's come from the Welsh government, which I know you should be aware of that, but I thought I'd share that.
Yeah, that's helpful, Hugh. And now members are thinking, well, what on earth are they talking about that they can't share publicly? And actually, there's nothing Machiavellian about it. Largely, they are, as Hugh has used the phrase, they are best practice sessions. And the encouragement I would offer to this committee is that very rarely, if ever, does a best practice suggestion emerge that we're not already doing. So in very useful sessions, nothing Machiavellian about them. They are very largely best practice, or how can we develop something to become best practice, which is probably the confidentiality aspect of it. Nothing more significant than that. But if it's, for what it's worth, Janet, you're right, we did talk about it. We potentially talked about putting it on as a standard agenda. I wouldn't be telling you anything you don't already know. It's things like engagement with group leaders, for example. It's things like reviewing our hearings procedures, for example, that we're already doing. So, yeah.
And is there an opportunity then, looking the other way, for this committee then to ask you to raise certain things when you go there? Is there a way that we would formally have an opportunity to do that? Or as chair, is it something that you would just normally just do and discuss with us what you were thinking of doing and asking for input as and when?
Yeah, I think it's probably both of those. So absolutely, you know my style, absolutely no issue at all. If any member ever wants to come to me and say, we're struggling with this as a committee, or we consider an X as a committee, why don't you bounce it off your colleagues and your peers? I hope you know that I will always do that. And yes, if it's something occurred to me that we are wrestling with, would I take members with me and I mean, psychologically, and ask your opinion? Of course I would. So the answer is yes. But I just want to make sure that we're clear on what he was said. There are no formal minutes produced that are for wider publication. Don't read anything into that. It is largely a best practice session. Thank you, but thank you for reminding us. Okay, thank you. That's been a really helpful session, particularly around the hearings procedure. Unless any other hands are raised, then I'm going to call the Standards Committee to a close. Thank you again. I'm not sure whether to do this or not. I see our next meeting is 17th of January. So am I allowed to wish you? No, I won't. I won't. I would just observe that it's next year. All right. Thank you, members. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you.